Great. Well, welcome. I'm Cynthia Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of the Vestibular Disorders Association. And today I'll be discussing how vestibular patients and healthcare professionals work together to advocate for increased awareness of and improvements to vestibular healthcare. So I want to start by giving you some background about VeDA. VeDA's mission is to support and empower vestibular patients on their journey back to balance. But what does that really mean? Well, we recognize that vestibular disorders can be challenging to diagnose and treat. Many patients consult 5 to 7 healthcare professionals over months to years before receiving an accurate diagnosis. And some are told that their symptoms are all in their head, they're just due to stress, and there's nothing that can be done to help them feel better. They feel helpless and hopeless. And VeDA's role is to advocate for and validate that their symptoms are real and that they are not alone on this journey. So we do that by first educating them about their condition so that they can be better advocates for their health, communicating more effectively with their doctors, and able to ask more informed questions. We then connect them with qualified vestibular healthcare specialists, which enables them to receive an accurate diagnosis and get effective treatment, because we know that getting an accurate diagnosis is really an important first step on their vestibular journey. We provide a community of support, which means that they can learn to cope with their symptoms better by connecting with their peers and what we call discovering their new normal. They're not going to be able to do all the things they used to do, but they can live a very effective and fulfilling life when they discover what their new normal is. Often people say that this journey actually makes them more compassionate and self-aware because they have time to reflect on their life. And many people decide they want to give back to the vestibular community by becoming ambassadors to raise awareness and help others who are still struggling. David and Glenn, who are here with us today, and they're going to be sharing their stories at the end of this presentation, are examples of our ambassadors. And this is where advocacy begins. So patient advocacy is about supporting and empowering patients as they navigate the healthcare system, which is often confusing and not very patient-friendly. With information and renewed confidence, people can feel better equipped to make informed decisions about their healthcare. Healthcare professionals like you are an integral part of this. It begins by listening to your patients and trying to understand their experiences and making them partners in their diagnosis and treatment journey to ensure that their rights and their preferences are respected. And going further, by working to improve systemic barriers that hinder people from getting good health care. So at VeDA, we see ourselves as the voice of the vestibular patient. We advocate for them by providing peer-reviewed articles written by vestibular healthcare specialists on various topics, including vestibular anatomy, vestibular testing, and treatments such as vestibular rehabilitation therapy. We also have articles written by patients about coping strategies, such as how to avoid triggers and how to navigate a relapse. We maintain a directory of vestibular healthcare professionals, enabling people to connect with a qualified provider quickly. And we offer in-person and online support groups that provide a safe space for people to discuss their physical, mental, and emotional struggles and to receive feedback from their peers. We serve on committees to update diagnostic criteria, representing the patient perspective, because so often the patient perspective isn't heard when a group of vestibular healthcare professionals comes together. And we submit input to both government and professional associations on topics such as disability guidelines. So we also, as part of the research that we're involved in, host a patient registry to collect data on the vestibular patient experience, which informs research and improves patient outcomes. All of our advocacy efforts, we leverage the knowledge and expertise of vestibular healthcare specialists, of our medical and scientific advisors, while prioritizing the needs of vestibular patients. The ultimate goal of patient advocacy is to promote patient-centered care. This means patients are diagnosed and treated rapidly and effectively, but it also means that patients feel empowered to control their healthcare journey, and ultimately that patients feel better. That's always what we're looking to achieve. It's all about the patient. It starts with public awareness, what we call making vestibular visible, because when vestibular, which is this very, complicated medical term, when we can make vestibular a household term, when people understand that vestibular means dizziness, it means vertigo, it means imbalance, and that these are signs that something is wrong with their inner ear, they'll become better at directing their healthcare journey. Public awareness also puts more pressure on the medical system to improve care for people with vestibular dysfunction, and hopefully draws more investigators like you to this field. And the more interest healthcare professionals show in conducting research, we know that the more research funding will become available. So I've mentioned the importance of patients advocating for their healthcare. Let's dive into that and see what that looks like. When patients learn about their condition, they're more informed, and this means that they can ask their healthcare provider questions that might prompt them to suggest tests and make referrals they might not otherwise have considered. It also means that patients can explore lifestyle changes that can improve their overall well-being, helping them to cope better with the consequences of their vestibular impairments. Examples of this include diet, sleep hygiene, and mental health care, most importantly. Many people, will get online and consult Dr. Google and end up going down a rabbit hole, believing information that hasn't been scientifically proven. And that's why it's so crucial for people to connect with reputable sources like VeDA, and for VeDA to make sure that the information we provide has been written and reviewed by experts. It's immensely helpful for patients to track their symptoms and triggers and be prepared with information and questions to maximize the effectiveness of their doctor visits. We recommend that patients bring a family member or friend to their doctor visits to take notes and help them remember everything they want to discuss. An empowered patient is someone who's not afraid to challenge their healthcare provider or to seek a second opinion if they feel they're not being listened to. Advocating for your healthcare requires maintaining an organized record of your medical history. VeDA provides patients with tools to do this and recommends apps and other resources that might be helpful as well. We also encourage them to be honest and transparent with their healthcare providers. Sometimes a detail a patient might not think is relevant to give their healthcare provider actually provides their healthcare provider with insight that they wouldn't have thought to share. So as you may know, research has shown that the relationship between patients and their healthcare providers can have a significant impact on their progress. We encourage patients to choose a healthcare provider that they trust and that they feel comfortable with. Sometimes this means shopping around and finding someone that you feel can be, who is being honest with you, who takes time with you, maybe someone that fits with your within your cultural group. This isn't necessarily a reflection on the quality of the healthcare provider, but rather validates the needs of that particular patient. As I mentioned, it's often helpful for people to bring a friend or family member with them to their medical appointments. In addition to having someone there to help them remember what was said, which, on the best of days is hard for most of us, but especially for vestibular patients who may have challenges with their cognitive processes, it's that much more important. It also provides the person or the family member with more insight into their loved one's experience, and perhaps helps them to understand that vestibular disorders are indeed real and serious medical conditions. If a person doesn't have a trusted family member, we might want to consider hiring, or they might want to consider hiring, a health coach or other advocate. Being empowered means being able to make informed decisions about one's health care based on what's right for them and for their lifestyle. For example, some people might not want to take medication and might want to explore and get information about complementary or alternative treatments that a medical professional might not initially offer up. So we encourage people to provide feedback to their healthcare providers constructively and productively. This might involve informing their healthcare provider about the results of vestibular testing so that they can better recognize the signs and symptoms in future patients. And what I'm talking about here is, so often patients, they first will see a primary healthcare provider who doesn't have much knowledge about vestibular healthcare and might not know the path to referring the patient to get a quick and accurate diagnosis. But by providing feedback to that healthcare provider, hopefully it will improve the patient's experience and also improve their healthcare and the healthcare of future patients. So it's really important for healthcare providers to be open to learning from their patients' feedback. So that leads us to the role of patients educating their healthcare providers. Let's talk about that. So this begins with patients being well informed, which aligns with what I was talking about before, our previous discussion on the importance of educating patients about their condition and directing them to reliable sources of information. So picture yourself as a healthcare professional whose patients brought you some information they think is relevant to their condition. Are they likely, or are you likely, to listen to them if they quote from a research paper or tell you that they heard about this from, for example, a Facebook group, someone that in a Facebook group that they're participating in? That's why VeDA provides evidence-based articles that patients can download and bring to their healthcare provider. We also provide patients with the language to describe their symptoms that aligns with the healthcare lexicon. It's so often patients will be trying to describe their experience and their symptoms, but they don't know what words to use. And so the healthcare professional doesn't pick up on what is really going on with them. We also help refer patients to apps that offer the option to report their symptoms and then download those reports that they can bring to their healthcare provider, which makes this process doubly easy for them. Whoops. Many patients have been shuffled through the medical system without receiving much help. This can make them cynical and even sometimes combative. And if that's how they approach their healthcare provider, it's not going to go well. So we encourage people to be respectful when offering feedback, to use I phrases rather than you phrases. Like, I feel this way rather than you haven't been giving me the information that I want. We refer to what they've heard, encourage them to refer to what they've heard from other specialists who are experts in the field. and maybe through one of VeDA's webinars or conferences, again, referring to respected sources of information. And above all, to refrain from criticizing their provider and instead to use open-ended statements that encourage dialogue and not to come off as being blaming, even if they are feeling like they're not getting the care that that is going to help them along in their journey. So we've discussed utilizing digital resources such as symptom tracking apps and information from other vestibular specialists, notably those that are well known in the community, as well as referencing VeDA as a respected source of information on vestibular disorders. But finally, I think it's important to recognize that patience and persistence are the key. And that is a very difficult thing to feel when you're someone who has been tossed around the medical system and it's been very difficult to get answers. Healthcare professionals are busy, and a patient may not be able to accomplish everything they want during a single appointment. However, they can continue the conversation through their online portal or schedule another appointment with them if necessary, or maybe find out if there's a doctor, if their doctor has an assistant who can take more time with them. So it's really about learning how to communicate with their healthcare professionals in a respectful way so that they can get the information that they need. So a significant part of grassroots advocacy involves patients sharing their stories with their family, their friends, and their local community. So let's talk about that a little bit. So once a patient has undergone the medical process and their symptoms are reasonably well managed, they may want to give back to the vestibular community to help raise awareness more publicly. And one way they can achieve this is by hosting educational events in their local community. It's really a grassroots effort. It's not a top-down effort. It's everybody sharing their story. And you're going to hear this over and over here. Sharing your story is an essential part of grassroots advocacy. So one way they can, a patient can do this in their local community is by partnering with a physical therapy clinic, for example, to host an open house, setting up information tables with printed materials, which VeDA can provide to them, making it very easy for them. Reaching people locally in person is a powerful way to raise awareness. It's incredible how many people will ask, what is vestibular? And they might, their eyes might glaze over initially at the medical term, but then a light bulb goes off in their head when they hear dizziness and vertigo, and they realize that they know someone who's been affected by a vestibular disorder, even if they didn't have a word to put to it. Another example of raising awareness locally is to partner with senior centers or places of worship or other community centered events. Or a lighter lift is to share information on social media. People can share their own story or share posts from VeDA's social media channels or other organizations such as professional organizations. Many patients end up creating their own blog or video or a podcast where they share their story, which often connects them with others in the vestibular community, where they form lasting relationships and friendships. This is actually a really amazing phenomenon, if you will, how the vestibular community and in VeDA's online vestibular community, we have so many what you might call vestibular influencers who get to know each other because they've seen each other online. They reach out to the other and they say, oh, I've had a similar experience. And they become sometimes closer knit than their actual friends or family, because these are people who understand what they're going through, and they're also joining together in this effort to raise awareness about vestibular disorders, and it's a very bonding experience. VeDA will host events, online events like Steps to Balance, which is actually this week in May, and Balance Awareness Week, which is in September, which Christian's going to talk more about. These are vehicles to engage people in raising awareness about vestibular disorders. So we create toolkits that people can download to make it easy to take action, as well as peer-to-peer fundraising platforms where people can share their story. People can use our press release, all the, these templates that we create for people that they can customize with their own information, and raise awareness by submitting a press release to a local newspaper or radio station, which very often will love the opportunity to spotlight a local community member. Many hospitals host health fairs where people can learn about various health conditions, and that's a great way to raise awareness about vestibular disorders. VeDA provides materials to people who want to build an information booth for a health fair or other type of local information station. And we have one-page flyers and infographics that are perfect for bulletin boards in public spaces, such as libraries. So legislative advocacy is also a powerful means of making an impact. It can be daunting, though, to know where to begin with legislative advocacy, and of course, it's very different in different countries. So I'll only talk about this very generally. Here in the U.S., there are several organizations within the rare disease space that have very active legislative advocacy teams to train and support patients who want to make their voices heard. Examples include the Rare Disease Legislative Advocates, which organizes trips to Washington, D.C., the capital here in the United States, where patients can actually meet with federal legislators. VeDA also encourages patients to join peer support groups, which provide knowledge that they can share, and also emotional support. Peer support groups are both in person and online. And I often find that people who are members of a support group gain more confidence to share their story more publicly, simply by sharing it with people in an informal and supportive atmosphere, and also receiving encouragement to more actively participate in advocacy. So, as I said, I'm going to say this over and over. The theme here is share your story. Sharing your story, whether you're a patient or a healthcare professional, is one of the most powerful ways you can raise awareness and compassion for people who are living with vestibular dysfunction. So VeDA offers many ways for people to do this through our website and other publications. Our ambassadors, VeDA ambassadors, are volunteers who make it their purpose to raise awareness about vestibular disorders in various ways, as I've discussed a little bit today. By being part of this group, they receive resources and support, and most of all, this sense of belonging in a community that understands what they're going through. And you'll hear from David and Glenn how powerful that can be. So also, finally, for patients, participating in research is a powerful way to feel like they're making a difference, and contributing to the furtherment of vestibular health care, contributing to knowledge about vestibular disorders by sharing their medical data. this informs and advances our advocacy efforts. VeDA maintains a patient registry that collects patient-reported information about their diagnosis and their treatment journey, as well as quality of life measures. And we also, through our registry, connect people to clinical trials that they might be eligible to participate in. All right, so this is probably the question you've been waiting for. What can healthcare professionals do to advocate for better awareness of vestibular disorders and improvement to the vestibular medical system? First and foremost, understand your patients. Book learning can tell you so much, can only tell you so much about the vestibular system. It does not provide insight into the patient experience. And this is so important. Listening to your patient, asking them about their quality of life. You can also check out VeDA's docu-series called The Life Rebalanced Chronicles. The URL is on the screen here. It features interviews with vestibular patients sharing their personal stories and how their vestibular disorder has impacted their lives, their works, and their relationships. And this is done in a very authentic way. These people, these patients, are sharing from their heart. They often become emotional in bringing up those challenging parts of their vestibular journey, and it's totally unscripted. They're just sharing their story, and it's a learning experience and also a humbling experience. Lastly, get involved. Join a professional association, stay informed about legislative advocacy initiatives, and consider volunteering with organizations like VeDA, like GDR Vertige, and other organizations that are involved in vestibular advocacy. All right, now I'm excited to introduce you to some of our volunteers who are active advocates for vestibular awareness and improvements in the medical system. We definitely have David Morrill and Glenn Schweitzer here today. Dana is a physical therapist, and we got our, she's seeing patients right now. We got a little mix up in our time zone. She may be able to join us later, but they're gonna share their stories in their own words. So I'm gonna start out by introducing David, who is a vestibular patient whose journey started with a misdiagnosed stroke. David is a support group leader, the chair of VeDA's ambassador board. He's the liaison to all VeDA volunteers and support groups, and he co-leads the largest vestibular support group on Facebook. David, do you want to share your story? And let me just ask, would you guys like me to stop the slideshow at this point? Is it easier to see the speakers without the slideshow going?
Yeah, I would suggest if you can stop sharing for now. And we can always go back.
There we go.
Yeah, wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. And on behalf of the vestibular community, we appreciate you having us here today. Like Cynthia said, your story is very important. And patients' stories are important because a lot of times people don't understand vestibular disorder. And in the community, what we say is you don't get it until you get it. I had no idea, like many other vestibular patients, what a vestibular disorder was. We didn't know anything about it. So we had to basically start from zero and educate ourselves. And VeDA, Vestibular Disorders Association, was a strong component when I first started and when a lot of other vestibular patients started. My story is a little different than most vestibular patients. My journey started with a stroke diagnosis that was delayed, and they didn't catch it in time because they thought it was a inner ear issue and not a central brain issue. So the diagnosis was delayed. We talked about quick diagnosis early with Cynthia, and obviously a stroke diagnosis is very important to make sure you get it immediately. Mine was delayed, which caused some brain damage in my cerebellum, which obviously caused some dizziness and imbalance for me. As I was recovering from my stroke, my therapists that were mostly trained in stroke therapy didn't understand why I wasn't recovering like everybody else. They had me on the bicycle, they had me lifting weights. My muscles were fine, but my balance system was totally gone, and I couldn't stand. I had to use a walker, and I was 52 years old, until I finally found a therapist that set me down on a chair and said, "Tell me how I can make you feel better." And he actually listened to me, and I told him my balance is off. I can't stand, and that's what the problem is. So we just worked on balance, and that's the other stroke stuff was thrown out, and we just worked on balance. And he finally got me back to a point where I was more functionable and able to do more things than I had. I still had a long recovery, so I was reaching out and trying to find other people that had this, because it seemed like my diagnosis was rare, and I didn't know where to go and how other people dealt with this type of story or this type of incident after a stroke. I know about everything else that people have with strokes, and a lot of other stroke survivors were trying to tell me how to cope, but it was a lot different. My balance was gone. Most of the other stroke survivors, their balance was not gone. So as I was reaching out and checking the internet out, I met up with a person from Johns Hopkins University here in the United States, and he does a diagnosis error problem with stroke, and he was kind of interested in my story. But he told me what I needed to really get in touch with was VeDA, the Vestibular Disorders Association. They were the ones that were on the leading edge of balance and disorder. So basically, I reached out and I wanted to make sure I gave back to this organization, because I didn't really understand how the dizziness worked and how my journey was going to be getting better. So I reached out and I jumped into volunteerism. A little background on me: I'm that type of person that's a type A person, meaning that I had my own business. I was going 12, 14 hours a day, and then I went down to nothing. But as I was starting to get better, I couldn't work in the traditional sense, but I wanted to do something to give back. So I jumped into the volunteering piece with VeDA, and I kind of just threw myself in head first, and I was out there advocating for other patients. I was actually the co-writer and an ambassador chairperson of the ambassadors, which we started many years ago. And then I got into leading support groups and doing all that stuff, which leads me to the role that I'm in now with VeDA. I've been with VeDA over 10 years, and I'm the community support coordinator. So I help all volunteers within our organization get into our organization and get volunteer positions and help them with their journey. So, and like Cynthia said, I also was big on social media. I have a Facebook group that is worldwide. We touch people in almost every country worldwide. We started this group back when I first had my stroke with 375 people. Just the other day, we reached 27,000 people that we are helping on Facebook in our community. So a little bit about my story, but again, the big thing is awareness, and a lot of people aren't aware of this disorder. I wasn't aware of it, and I had a little bit of medical background, not a lot, a little bit, but I had no idea what a vestibular disorder was. So education, I think, is really the key, like Cynthia said, and it's going to be by everybody, by healthcare professionals, by patients, by friends and family. If we all can get on the same page and make sure people are aware of what this disorder is, I think it'd be much easier moving forward in the years. Thank you again for letting me tell my story and having me here.
Thank you, David. Hey, David, I have a question for you. I know you mentioned David Newman Toker, who's the researcher at Johns Hopkins, and your connection with him. Even since then, you've been involved with several research projects with him, right?
Yeah.
Giving input on the vestibular patient experience.
Absolutely. So what I've done with him is I've been a patient advocate for many years with David Newman Toker, who's at Johns Hopkins University. And basically, he was studying the same phenomenon that hit myself is patients like me presenting at local emergency rooms with some set of dizziness. And now they have to figure out if it's a stroke or an inner ear issue. And a very few percentage of those are actually strokes. So we're trying to figure out how to balance, wasting healthcare dollars on imaging every patient versus narrowing down the patients that are actually having a central brain issue. And that we use, as a patient advocate, we use some different types of electronic devices, like goggles. I was involved in the HINTS, HINTS. If you look that up, for bedside physicians to help better diagnose a person that's having a central brain issue versus an inner ear issue. And one thing I didn't mention in my story, and one of the great reasons I got involved with this is and it's very rare. The type of stroke I had is very rare. And I had that, and within a month after having my stroke, my brother, who is just about a year and a half older than me, had the same exact stroke. And he presented at a different ER that was going to do the same thing, but my family stepped in and said, my brother just went through these same symptoms. I think maybe you want to check for a stroke. They looked at him like, they're crazy, but they went to imaging, and he actually did have the same stroke that I had. But the difference in outcome was they caught it immediately and was able to, cure that stroke without any type of, illness going forward. So quick diagnosis is the main key here. And I've been working with Dr. Newman-Token for many years to help, professionals help get the diagnosis quicker so we can have better outcomes.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Awesome. All right, Glenn. I want to introduce to you Glenn Schweitzer, who is a patient with Meniere's disease. He is the author of 2 blogs and books, Mind Over Meniere's and Rewiring Tinnitus. He's a wellness coach for people struggling with tinnitus and Meniere's disease. And he's also an author on several blogs, which I will let you explain. Glenn, do you want to share your story?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Good to be here with you today. I thought I'd start out by talking a little bit about just sharing a little bit of my personal perspective on the need for patient advocacy. To me, it's always sort of felt like the Western medical system was largely designed to just diagnose and treat health problems, and more often than not symptoms, with medicine and surgery. And when it comes to vestibular disorders, or really any chronic health problem where specialists are needed or multiple doctors need to coordinate, or there isn't just a single magic pill or treatment to prescribe, that you find that patients just end up falling through the cracks in the system. And there's also like a pretty intense psychological and emotional dimension to vestibular disorders. And in my experience, a lot of physicians and specialists are just really not that comfortable engaging patients on that level. And so I'll just kind of share a little bit about my story. So I was first diagnosed when I was 24. So I was diagnosed fairly young. I had gone for probably like 5 or 6 months where I was having this buildup of these on and off fluctuating symptoms that were progressing, but I kept coming up with other reasons why it wasn't anything worth worrying about. Like I would think I was getting food poisoning, because oftentimes I would have like episodes of symptoms following a meal out at a restaurant where I would eat something with a lot of sodium, and that would trigger my symptoms. I didn't know it at the time, but sodium was a big trigger. And early in my journey, when my symptoms reached their worst point and I was having really violent vertigo attacks, and I finally had my first appointment with a local ENT, I had a really horrible experience. The ENT was really cold. His personality, he kind of let me tell my story, and just without wanting to do any testing, really just sort of delivered the diagnosis initially in a way that to me kind of felt like a death sentence. And I got really scared. Like, he was telling me all these things I was going to have to change. He sort of implied that this was going to slowly destroy my hearing. I had it bilaterally in both ears. So I was sort of immediately believed I was going to slowly go deaf. And I was really scared, and I started asking questions. I wanted to better understand what he was telling me. And I remember he raised his voice and he said, "Are you questioning me now? Are you the doctor now?" And the whole thing was just a horrible experience that left me feeling completely hopeless. And I ended up in a pretty deep depression that lasted for a while. I was pretty young, like I said, when I was diagnosed, and it really felt like my life was over. Cynthia mentioned how doom and gloom and scary the online landscape could be. Just to give you a sense of how dark that picture was, I remember in those early days reading a meta study that looked at like a pretty large group of Meniere studies where they were assessing quality of life, and they determined that the conclusion was that quality of life in late stage Meniere's disease was objectively worse, or subjectively, I guess, worse than terminal cancer patients who were like weeks away from death. And so these were the kind of things that were coming into my mind in this early time period, and it was quite traumatic. VeDA was one shining beacon of hope in those early days, and was like a source of like actual helpful information. Now with me, it was several months later, I got very lucky, and on my second attempt to get a second opinion, I found a really kind and compassionate neurotologist who told me stories about other patients that were doing really well and who had improved and were living great lives. He shared all sorts of strategies and tools that I could use to better manage my symptoms. He gave me real hope. And it was then that I really started to fight for my health and was willing to do whatever it took to get better. And so for better or worse, vestibular patients really have to take charge of their healthcare journey. And that's not only difficult, but it's something most people have never had to do before, because most of the time you go to the doctor and they tell you what's wrong and they give you the solution. But that was certainly the case for me. Like, I had never really confronted a challenge like this before. And it took a while to fight my way back to health. I tried a lot of different medications, a lot of different symptom management strategies. It was very up and down, and it was hard to maintain hope through a lot of those flare-ups. But hope was the missing piece for me, and the thing that my second doctor gave me that really changed everything for me, because with the first I didn't even know that it was possible that there was a world that I could that where I might be okay, until that doctor sort of revealed that to me. So how specialists approach their patients matters a lot, and I think even just a little bit of empathy and patience can make all the difference in the world. And so since then, for my own part, my entire career really now revolves around patient advocacy. So I've been an ambassador with VeDA for more than 10 years as well, just like David. As Cynthia mentioned, I went on to write 2 books about my journey: Mind Over Meniere's, which was my first book. Why I thought I could write a book about anything, I'm not quite sure, but I did. And then I went on to write another book about tinnitus. Along the way, I realized that tinnitus was sort of a much bigger problem than Meniere's disease, or a more widespread problem, and it was something I had struggled with greatly as part of my Meniere's journey, and so sort of kind of became like a second kind of part of my career. But I also run a Facebook group for a Meniere's disease support group on Facebook. We have, I think we're the largest one now. It's been going, I took it over probably like 8 or 9 years ago, and I think we're over 42,000 people now, believe it or not. I also write 2 blogs. I make YouTube videos, all with sort of the goal of raising awareness and helping patients to improve their quality of life. And primarily, though, over the last decade, my work has mainly been as a health coach, where I've worked with more than 1,000 Meniere's, tinnitus, and hyperacusis patients one-on-one in this sort of health coaching and peer support capacity, helping people to understand their diagnosis, to find better treatments and tools and protocols, and really just to improve their quality of life overall. And Cynthia had mentioned in her presentation that like a lot of times patients will go through sort of like personal growth as a result of this, and that's certainly been the case for me. Meniere's disease did change my life, but it wasn't in the way that I expected. And I have enough time and distance now to see and feel that like these changes were ultimately for the better. Like, and I think that's true for a lot of people. When you go through really difficult adversities like this, it forces you to change in a way that perhaps you never would have been open to before. And here I am now, 14 years later, and I find myself in this wonderful career of helping people, and that's something I never had envisioned or imagined for myself. So that's a little bit about me and my journey and the kind of advocacy work I do. So I'm happy to be here with you guys today.
Awesome, Glenn. Thank you. Your story is so amazing, how you really took your, this really hard diagnosis and, made something of it, and all the people that you're helping. And I think it's just a wonderful example of how, number one, how patients can have such an impact on the vestibular community, and how important it is to have peers like you for people to be able to connect with, both one-on-one and through your Facebook group. It's really, really important to have that online community.
I appreciate the kind words.
Here's Dana. Yay! Welcome, Dana. I'm so glad. All right. Well, we also have Dana Trass, who's a physical therapist, just coming from seeing a patient, I believe. She leads what we call Dana's Flock, which is a group of volunteers that actively advocates for vestibular awareness in their local communities and around the world. Started out local and became a global sensation. So, Dana, do you want to tell your story?
Absolutely. Thank you, Cynthia. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm glad I made it. We had a little mix up with the time zone, so I appreciate everybody being accommodating to my schedule. So my background is a physical therapist. I've been in practice for more than 25 years now. And I started out primarily treating individuals who had neurological deficits in a hospital setting. And as I moved into the outpatient world, I started to notice this big hole of patients that weren't being addressed in our community. So those individuals with chronic vestibular problems and chronic symptoms following a concussion. And so for the last 15 years, that's really where I have been putting my focus and my energy into. And my practice now is 100% vestibular clients. So I'm really excited to work with that community. I'm located in the suburbs of Chicago. So and surprisingly, not a lot of providers that specialize in helping individuals with chronic vestibular problems. And I came across VeDA many, many years ago and started using that as a resource for my patients to access information about vestibular disorder and to find providers in their area, different physicians and things. And as I started to use them more as a resource, I thought, well, this is silly. I should be able to help out too. So I started to volunteer and I started a support group, because what I saw with my patients was that there was a big feeling of isolation among that population. And those patients felt very alone. They didn't feel like they had support from oftentimes their family, their friends, their colleagues, and they just wanted to have a connection with someone else who understood what they were going through. And so that's where my support group started. And as that grew, my support group members, through their own vestibular journeys, started to feel better themselves and started to manage their vestibular symptoms better, as we hope that they all do. And they started to form their own support groups. So that's how my network in the vestibular community really started to grow. And many of us joined as ambassadors with VeDA as well. And this small little local group that I had of people that had attended my support group, we started working together. It was more fun to support VeDA's messaging and support vestibular awareness working together than it was to, again, be isolated and work alone. So we started this little group, and we would support VeDA's missions with Steps to Balance Week and Balance Awareness Week and vestibular awareness. I'm very lucky that I can set things up in my clinic and raise awareness here. So that was where we did a lot of our work. And that was fun. And as their support groups started to grow, we gained more people they would say, hey, I have this person in my group who would really like to help us out, and they're in Florida, or they're, somewhere else around the world or in the country. And that's where this flock of people grew from. And that formed Dana's flock. And so my flock is really a team of ambassadors, primarily across the United States. We do have other international people join us on occasion as well. And we meet regularly and discuss different opportunities to raise awareness for vestibular patients and the vestibular community, and to do whatever we can to support the messaging of VeDA. And it's been a really, really great experience for me as a clinician. So I'm the only one in the flock that does not have a vestibular disorder themselves. But what this has done is really open my eyes to the magnitude and the impact that vestibular dysfunction has on a person, and how it affects their everyday life and their ability to participate in things that they want to be doing. And I think it's made me a better physical therapist, quite honestly, because I have more empathy and understanding for these patients. And so what I see as my role now, not just as the leader of this flock, but also as a clinician, is that one, I think I work really hard to educate other healthcare providers. There are still so many primary care physicians in my community, other doctors, nurses in our community that do not understand vestibular disorders and do not understand what kind of treatments are available for that population. So I'm working really hard to get the word out about what it is and what we can do as a team together. I also find that it's very important to educate the public as well. Again, the public isn't aware. These are invisible illnesses, and our patients look fine. They look like they can get through their day without any problems, and they're really good at covering up what those problems are a lot of times. And so educating the public through the events that we do in the clinic, through the events that I do with my flock, really to help just raise awareness and advocacy for people with chronic vestibular dysfunction. And finally, I think my other role is to form a professional network. I can't do it all alone. My flock is super supportive and helpful, but I also need a team of professionals around me, because I don't know everything, and it's okay to not know everything. And as physicians, it's okay to not know everything about what's going on with your patient. But what I feel is important is what we need to know is, what is that next step for the patient? Where can we refer them? How can we help them? What other kind of healthcare professionals do we need to add to this team to help our patients the best? And so that's where I'm at right now with my role, both as a physical therapist and with leading the flock of VeDA ambassadors.
That was fantastic, Dana. I am so glad you brought up how important it is to develop a multidisciplinary team to support vestibular patients. That's really at the heart of VeDA's advocacy efforts is, and I think one of the unusual and challenging things about vestibular disorders is there's no one healthcare professional that treats vestibular disorders. It's not like you have cancer, you go to an oncologist. There is a multidisciplinary team that has to be working together. Your medical doctor, your neurologist, perhaps a neurologist if you have vestibular migraine or other central disorders, an audiologist to test and evaluate the inner ear, and then the physical therapists to help with treatment. And they all have to be working together. And sometimes patients end up entering the system somewhere in the middle, and they don't know where to go. So having all those healthcare professionals working together is so key. I just want to say thank you to Dana, Glenn, and David. I'm so humbled for all that you do for VeDA and the vestibular community. It blows my mind because VeDA is just a small organization, what we do is because of all of you. And it's just amazing the global impact that we have because of such wonderful and amazing volunteers like you. So thank you.